To another video. So this week we celebrate sort of in Queensland and in Australia really the 1 year anniversary of when the whole country really went into lockdown and mass stand downs happened and companies started closing. So to celebrate that not so great thing, I thought I'd look at how my life has changed in the last year because of COVID. When I was reflecting back on it, we were having some discussions both at training, at home and at work about changes that have happened because of COVID and future proofing and what's next. I myself took the opportunity to really look at how my life had changed and where I wanted to potentially go next, and I just thought it was a really good time to share it all with you guys. So I hope that you enjoy this. Okay, so the first change is a little obvious and we're currently sitting in it, and it is now that I mostly work from home for my job. So I was stood down for 6 weeks, roughly, almost 6 weeks. I was on JobKeeper and I did nothing. I was not required to be employed at all. I got a phone call towards the end of May and I was asked to come back on 2 days a week, I think it was, for a couple of weeks, and then it went up to 3 days a week. So I was still for a really long time, I think for another 3 months. Actually, no, I think around about October, I went back to full-time work again. So for most of last year, I either did nothing or I had extremely long weekends, which was wonderful. And fortunately, I was on JobKeeper, and the difference between JobKeeper when I was stood down and when I was working was that I got the same amount of money, but when I was working, I got paid superannuation on top of that. So for the 6 weeks I was stood down, I just got enough money really to live off. Whereas when I started working again, superannuation came back into place. So that's why I was actually really happy to go back to work a few days a week, because it meant that I was still putting some money into super. Superannuation, for anyone who doesn't live in Australia or just doesn't know, is compulsory retirement saving in Australia. I believe it's currently mandated at around 9.5%. Some companies such as like universities and governmental agencies do pay above that. Later in the year, we are meant to get a compulsory rise in the amount of super we pay. Whether or not that, it is legislated, but whether or not that will happen is a little up in the air at the moment, just because we are still recovering from COVID, and there are some concerns that paying more super might put companies in stress and send back all the progress we've made on COVID. So I don't really know if that's going to happen, but I think super at the moment is maybe 9.5% for myself, and it's going up to 10% in July, but we're not really sure. But yeah, having said that, I now work from home 3 days a week and I'm in the office 2 days a week. I do just want to say, like, my company always had the option to work from home in some way. Ideally, it was only 1, maybe 2 days a week. But now it's in Queensland anyway. We now work from home more than we are in the office. It is a little bit different in other states. I know in South Australia, they went back into the office full time as soon as they could. In Queensland, we had a bunch of reasons why we have not gone back into the office full time. The first one being that really until December we had some social distancing rules, and while our office is quite big, a lot of the area is taken up storing stuff or broken down into like meeting rooms such as boardrooms or smaller meeting rooms. So the general space where staff actually have their desks is quite limited, and we couldn't have all our staff in at the same time. So what we did was we split the staff into 2 teams, and everyone was assigned like Monday, Wednesday, Tuesday, Thursday, and then we were meant to do alternating Fridays, but that never really worked out because the people who ran competitions mostly are at those competitions from Friday. They're either running them or they're setting them up. So it meant that most Fridays the office was empty anyway. So we just decided, all right, we're just leaving it at 4 days and the office is always empty on the Friday. If anyone needs to come and do a mass amount of printing or they want to pull out a lot of stock and check it, Friday's your day to do it because there's no one else in there. All right, so closely leading on from the working from home thing is, as I mentioned earlier, I got stood down during COVID, and part of this helped me realize my true value to the company. And what I mean by this, and this is not having a go at my employer at all, I get it, the senior staff had to make really difficult decisions to save the company, and their decisions did save the company, which meant that yes, it was a long slog for some people to get back to full-time employment again, and you know, we sort of moved into November and we still had staff who were on partial stand down, but you know, they stood me down at what was my busiest time of the year, and my role at that time of the year, the project I was managing and focusing on, was collecting in membership dues, which form the biggest part of our operating budget. So I think it was like maybe a week, 10 days before all the stand downs happened, we had an all staff meeting over Zoom, and they said, look, this COVID thing, it's going to be bigger than we expected. And I remember really in the middle of March where we got called into a last minute a staff meeting, and it was basically saying, listen, this virus has now come into Australia through the borders, so we're going to work from home for the next 2 weeks while this is sorted out. And then we got to the end of March and they're like, okay, we're working from home for the foreseeable future. And, you know, they set out a number of game plans to sort of keep the staff engaged. We sort of got to the week before Easter. I know it was like the Wednesday before Easter. And they basically said, listen, this COVID thing is very serious. We had I think amongst the highest level of community transmission we'd ever had in Australia at that time. And they were like, okay, so, you know, things were closing, like gyms had closed by then. You know, you were now allowed to only exercise in really small groups. And, you know, working in the sporting industry meant that there was no competitions and people couldn't go overseas to compete. People couldn't come to our country to compete because borders had closed. And I think we were pretty close. It was around about this time they started closing the state borders. So they had an all-staff meeting and they said, we're going to, unfortunately, going to have to stand staff down to save the company because we can't operate at normal functions. You know, competitions aren't going ahead. We can't go out and run, you know, programs. And they made it very clear that the only people who would be kept on in some capacity during this time would be people crucial to the company surviving. And you would assume, as I did, and basically everyone around me assumed, that the person whose job it was to collect the membership dues that help us with the operating budget would be kept on, because that's how we pay bills and how we operate. And we started discussing payment plans. We do allow payment plans in certain instances, but we are, you know, sort of like, we need to lower the standards and the bars to meet those payment plans. And we'd already started that. So like, we had just assumed the finance team would be kept on, and, you know, we were sort of thinking maybe 2 to 3 days a week, and we'd need to keep the dialogue open with these groups. And then I got the phone call, I think like the day before, you know, the Easter long weekend, saying, oh, you'd be stood down indefinitely. And, you know, at that moment, I sort of realized, okay, well, that's fine. Like, I'm like, okay, well, I'll hand over my notes to whoever's going to be managing this project while I'm on stand down. But I really did realize then that you haven't gone about this in the way you've said, because, like, you know, as you stay in contact with people, you find out who's been kept on. And something that really hurt me was there were people who were running this website development that were a year behind schedule, and they got kept on through this, whereas someone who was trying to get money in so we could keep paying our suppliers and eventually get back to normal operations was stood down. It did make me realize just how unimportant to the company I am, and it made me also realize at the same time that the company will always do what it needs to do to survive. And that's not a bad thing. Like, if a company doesn't survive, it can't employ people and it can't use other services. But it just made me realize, like, oh, hey, at times, like, I really stress about my job, and I, like, all these things, like, I, lose sleep at night because I'm like, oh, this could have been done better, or I forgot to do this, all this sort of stuff. And I sort of realized, well, hold on a minute. The company, I'm giving the company a loyalty that they're not earning, because given the first opportunity to save money, they will get rid of me. And they've been showing that through, we have had a number of staff leave. They took up better opportunities elsewhere, and their roles are being refilled, but they're being refilled at much lower wages. So for me, that just sort of says, oh, hey, you are not like so critical to the company that they will. All right, so the third thing that I sort of learned all the way through COVID was sort of a twofold thing. It was one, I definitely started educating myself better about my money and what I could be doing with it and what I should be doing with it. And secondly, I started to think about my future and what I really wanted from it. And what I mean by this is, I on JobKeeper was earning 1/3 of my wage a month. But, because I did start earning or getting so much less money, I really had to sit down and go, okay, what is actually really critical and important to me existing in this world? What are the luxuries? And what should I be doing with like my money to make it work better for me? Because I've been, pretty lucky, other than being made redundant once and then finishing up just an impossible job that I just couldn't work in anymore. I've pretty much been steadily employed since I was 18, and I've had money to do things that I wanted to do. But there always just seemed to be, those grown-up things that you were going to do in the future. Things like buy a house, invest in shares, like really, and have a decent amount of savings so that if something came up, like if something broke on the car, like you can just pay to have it fixed, and you're like, oh, we'll just take that out of the savings account. Like, it's not this, oh my gosh, I have no idea how I'm going to fix it. So I really, sat down and started engaging with some, really great, financial advice out there. And I spoke to my accountant, who I only used to speak to like once a year to do my taxes, about, setting myself up for the future and making my money work for me rather than have me work for my money. And I think in all up, this was a good thing for COVID, because it sort of went, okay, so these things are important to me. And it's nice to have, the style of shoes you like in many different colors, but it's not necessary. So I'm now like a lot less on impulse buying. I really think things through a lot more. And I don't just spend all day online shopping now or browsing, and just the temptation's not there. So I'm sort of really proud I've put myself in a better financial position because of COVID. Okay, so the next thing that's changed for me since COVID is the way that I consume and where I consume media from has changed. So I'll be the first to admit, I never really watched the news pre-COVID, just because generally speaking at 6 and 7 o'clock at night, that's when the news airs in Australia. I'm generally either traveling home from work or still at training, so I just miss it. And in the morning we did have commercial breakfast networks on, just for the the 6:30, 7 o'clock news calls, so you knew sort of what time in the morning it was. So because of that, once COVID hit, you obviously want some information to help you know what's happening in the world, when it might be over, and also to help you make informed decisions. And I just found that with a lot of the commercial networks, it just wasn't giving me the information I wanted. I wanted to know how this came about and how they were going to fix it, and why things were being implemented, and why you could do certain things but you couldn't do others. And I just found with the commercial networks, like, they tried to just get things into like 20-second sound bites, and segments were more focused on like fitting into a predetermined time frame to get onto the advertising, which is obviously how they generate new revenue. And I just, for me personally, I was just like, this is a time in our life where we should not be sensationalizing things. We should be listening carefully and asking, informed questions to these experts, so that we come out the other side of this better. So because of that, I've found myself more going towards consuming media from places like the ABC, which is the Australian Broadcasting Company, and SBS, because while SBS does have some advertising on it now to help fix their financial woes, I just find that conversations are much longer. The hosts ask more in-depth questions, and experts are really allowed to speak clearly and speak for longer and explain questions. And perhaps more importantly, on the ABC in particular, I watch ABC Breakfast now. They have people write in and ask questions, but also just on that, I find that the ABC covers a lot different topics, so it's not. So the second to last thing that has changed in my life since COVID is that I have to say that I'm more community aware than what I used to be. So I do live outside the city, as I've mentioned before, and I guess you could say the suburb I live in itself is its own little sort of community. You know, when COVID hit and, you know, like businesses, you know, cafes in particular could only do takeaway, you know, we really made an effort as a family to really look at some of these smaller businesses and to see how we could support them. And we did once a week, every week anyway, we usually have takeaway for lunch on a Saturday. And that's for many reasons. The top one being we don't generally have a lot of food in the house by Saturday. We do grocery shopping Sunday. But also I go to training in the morning. It's a very long morning. I don't have much breakfast because I basically just get up to leave for training. So I only have a small breakfast. So I'm starving when I get home. So we usually get something like hamburgers and chips, and it just really hits the spot quite nicely. So we continued having that throughout COVID because we could still have our takeaway. But what we started doing was a lot of the little cafes in our area started doing meal kits, and it let us try different types of foods that we might not have tried when we went out for dinner. And, you know, we got to know a lot of these people and just, I guess, really feel a part of a community in a way we never had ever before. And finally, the final thing in the way that my life has changed since COVID is living in Australia. You know, I've become, you know, just so aware of how lucky we are over here. We have family and friends overseas, mostly in America and the UK. And, you know, you see in the US that they had to live off, you know, $800 stimulus checks, whereas I was getting $1,500 from the government every fortnight when I wasn't working because of COVID for JobKeeper. You know, we never had any worries about, you know, if you got COVID, you would just go through Medicare and get treatment, and there was no issues for that. You know, we had such firm social distancing and closures to ensure that the health system could keep up with the demand. They didn't want to run out of ventilators. Like, while these things happen to us, and you know, some of them, you know, we're sucky. Like, don't get me wrong, in Queensland we've just come out of a lockdown and we've still got another week of wearing masks indoors, and it's a pain in the butt to work out in a mask. But, you know, it means that, you know, I can still go to the gym to work out, you know, I can still go grocery shopping, I can still go and get my hair done if I want to, you know, because we did all these things, and I'm just so incredibly grateful for that. But not only that, like I said earlier, when I started earning so much less money, I realized so many of these things that I was like, well, I want to buy that and I want to do that. It was like, I don't need those things. I have so much already. I'm going to try and make these things work, just because it's not perfectly what I imagined in my head or perfectly what I think I need. It's more than capable. And I just, overall, I have more of a gratitude for what I have and the opportunities that are before me now than what I ever had before. And I guess that's why, you know, I really did sit down and think about what I want from my life and what I want to achieve. Because living in this country, in Australia, I actually do genuinely have the ability to make those things happen. And I can only be grateful for that, and also excited about, you know, the future. So thank you very much for watching another vlog. It was a little bit different. I hope you enjoyed it. I just sort of felt, looking back on some of my earlier vlogs, that it's been a lot of training content at the moment, just because at this time of the year for me, it's just, you know, we're going through processes at work. There's nothing too exciting happening, but for me, all the exciting stuff and the big things in my life happen around, you know, track and field and competing and training. So I do hope you enjoyed this. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel.